We'll be having a caucus in about 15 minutes, and where we'll be discussing members' concerns that still arise out of Medicare, and primarily because we see a sham of a vote taking place this evening, rather abruptly, and coming ahead of the President's meeting this week with members of the Republican Conference and the Democratic Caucus. And again, we read in the papers from Mitch McConnell and others that there will be no debt ceiling vote without cuts to Medicare. And needless to say, this will only currently inflame our caucus, where we believe that adult conversations need to take place. And the time has come for us to sit down and discuss these issues in an adult manner. I think everyone recognizes this, the column that said Wall Street is all in on the joke. Well, the problem is that in our recent history, we've seen this joke before. I was on the floor of the House of Representatives when we watched the stock market plunge when people try to play chicken with critical issues, etc. Let us hope that the market won't be affected by the obvious sham that's going on today. I just want to read what was said by Mr. Hayes from United Technologies Corporation when we had a Ways and Means Committee hearing, and I raised the issue of the debt ceiling and the importance of a clean vote on the debt ceiling. Here's what he said. I think it would be devastating to the world economy, and if Congress failed to raise the debt limit, the full faith and credit of the United States government, which is the basis upon which the entire world financial system revolves around. If you think we have problems in 2008 with the Lehman crisis, this is devastating. A default by the U.S. government would have repercussions beyond anything we saw in 2008 and in 2009. All the witnesses were Republican witnesses. Let us hope that the markets understand that this is just a sham of a vote that's taking place this evening. But I'm sure for many it won't be. I guess that's why in this country we have a fourth estate and people who become the truth tellers in the charade that's about to take place upstairs. With that, let me turn it over to my colleague and the Vice Chair of the Caucus, Xavier Becerra.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. So I think most folks who've watched Washington, D.C. can do the math. You have the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, a member high up in leadership on the Republican ranks here in the House, authoring and presenting a bill to the House of Representatives which he and his Republican colleagues say he will vote against. You then have our Republican colleagues have the Republican leadership put this legislation on a suspension calendar. So we get a total of 20, 40 minutes to debate the entire sum of whether or not the U.S. of A should default on its bills. But then, of course, we read from the New York Times that, quote, Republican leaders have privately assured Wall Street executives that this is a show. It goes on to further say, quoting an executive of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, quote, Wall Street is in on the joke. So does it surprise us that today the stock market went up by more than 100 points? If this were truly a vote to determine whether or not the U.S. would vote to default on its debt, I don't believe the stock market would be shooting up 100 points. That's all to say this. Why the heck are we doing a bill like this on a suspension calendar and not seriously debating it at a time when we're getting very close to that point where America may for the first time really default on its bills? Perhaps because this has been superseded by something else our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle did, and that was they presented a budget, a Republican budget, that for the first time made clear their efforts to try to end Medicare. And we saw the results last week in New York's 26th congressional district, where when people got to actually read what Republicans were planning to do in their budget, they panicked. And they did what most good Americans will do when they can't do much more after panicking but to exercise their vote. And they explained to Republicans how deeply, deeply against what Republicans are trying to do to Medicare they are. And so does it surprise anyone that this week we're talking about something other than the Republican plan to end Medicare? That's why I think you see today a sham vote that isn't serious on the issue of defaulting on our loans. It's come to that, but perhaps it's come to that because after over 4 months, we still don't have a job creation bill that this House of Representatives has passed. And thank God that we had enough steam moving forward into 2011, that we are still seeing the economy create jobs. But if the Republicans get in the way, we could see this fragile economy continue to slow down, which could lead us into a double-dip recession. And so the reality becomes this. At some point, as the chairman said, we'll sit down and get serious. It better be soon, because pretty soon the stock market won't react as it did today when we take a vote on whether or not we're going to default on our bills. It will react when it sees that the signs are truly there, and it's time that we sat down tough, sensible negotiations to get this done the right way.
Yes, go ahead. Sure.
Mr. Welch and more than 100
Sure.
members of your caucus said, let's have a vote. Are the Republicans simply responding to that by saying, let's put this issue...
Out of the pureness of their hearts, I can just see them now. They all huddle together and they say, geez, that Peter Welch is such a thoughtful member. I think what we'll do is come together and, after all, give him the kind of clean vote that he wants on this. And, of course, in earnest to make sure that we take care of our colleagues on the other side, we're going to want to make sure that we incorporate this in a way that, as the vice chair has said, is going to require a 2/3 vote, because we'll put it on suspension, where there'll be 20 minutes of debate, surely more than enough time for 100 people divided by 20, you do the math, for them to express their deep and abiding concerns with regard to this issue. Look, it's politics. We get it. It's a sham. But when the stakes are so high, the global economy revolves around the United States of America. What happened to the grand old party? What happened to them along the way? Every single economist that we've spoken to has said, do not mess around with this. This is too important to the world economy, not just to our markets, and we've already been through. We're thinking of inviting the Republicans to see Too Big to Fail, and perhaps we can review and go over that process again in terms of what has transpired and how we are in the situation we are today. I know that they have amnesia with regard to the debt. In their minds, it's only Barack Obama who's done that. But it seems to me like there's a history of some $10 trillion in debt that the president inherited. Yes?
Leader Pelosi has said we have...
You can call her speaker.
You're anticipating.
So are we. So am I.
You'll need your Medicare, you know that.
She has said we have a plan, it's called Medicare. Are there any changes, any spending savings that the two of you could see yourselves supporting?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we said this before. Reuters came out with a report in 2011 Last time I said this, the reporter from Reuters, I saw her kind of smiling. At any rate, that said there's $700 billion annually in savings that can take place within our healthcare system. Xavier Becerra, and I know he'll want to comment on this, made the point as well that, look, we all understand, and certainly all of you do, that Medicare is a reimbursement system based on health care costs. So any cut to the individuals, cutting individuals from receiving benefits, isn't going to change the cost of medical devices, hospitals, insurance premiums, trial bar fees, go down the list, pharmaceutical drugs, etc. What has to be reformed in order to bring the costs down, which was what the Affordable Health Care Act was about, is driving after those costs. Why would we attempt to balance the deficit that this nation faces on the backs of those that least can afford it? For us, as Democrats, this has become a defining moment and a line drawn in the sand for us. Not to be able to go after the costs that drive up the reimbursements to Medicare, but to go after those drivers. How can it be that the rest of the world is somewhere between 7 and 8%, the highest being Switzerland at 10% of gross domestic product for the cost of health care, and the United States is approaching 20%. We think that that's where the bipartisan effort should be put forward to squeeze out the costs associated with the reimbursement of Medicare. Javi, did you want to? I kind of exhausted it for you. But
So, again, remember what we're comparing this to. The Republican plan would double the cost for seniors very rapidly. It would institute cuts immediately for millions of seniors because of the taking the support away on the donut hole that we give to seniors in the health reform. It eliminates the preventative care benefits with zero copays that were in the health care reform. And so the Republican bill, which cuts, doubles the cost, ends Medicare for seniors, doubles the cost, and starts to make cuts immediately to seniors, is the one proposal that you see out there today. They don't come up with the level of savings that we already did, $500 billion worth. And by the way, a lot of members of Congress who were here last year paid the price of providing those savings of $500 billion. $500 billion is what we found in savings. That's no chump change. And when someone can come up with $500 billion over the next 10 years, then they can sit with those of us who voted to pass the health reform from last year that enacted not just reform, but saved every American, as the CBO will tell you, a ton of money. And so we can stand up there and feel very proud that with legitimacy we can say we've already done some of the cutting. There are also other proposals that are out there to actually go a little further. We think there's work that can be done in terms of how we go about purchasing prescription drugs. There are many of us who supported the effort to have a public option, which would have saved us over $100 billion additional. So there are any number of ways you can do it. But before anyone can sort of get into the ring with us to talk about how we need to change Medicare and provide savings, let them find $500 billion worth of savings as we did by going after some of the replication, the fraud, the abuse, and then they can stand toe-to-toe with us because we can stand legitimately on how we've done things to save Medicare without, and this is the underline, without cutting benefits to our seniors.
Thank you. We have a caucus at 5:30, so I
Will both of you be voting no then on the debt ceiling bill, just to clarify that?
I'm voting no.
I haven't made up my mind yet. I mean, we have a caucus that we're going in. I'm late. In all seriousness, I want to take a close look at where our caucus is because we have, in all sincerity, people that have put in good faith a letter out there to the caucus, and I think we have a responsibility, and certainly I do as the chair, to hear them out at this caucus. I did not sign on to the letter because the letter was addressed to the caucus, but my inclination would be to vote with them, and so it's.
How are they going to vote?
We don't know. We don't know. That's where we're going.
Yeah, and if I could just add on that part, because I think the chairman raised the operative point for Democrats. We want to do the responsible thing. All those Democrats who wrote a letter were saying, let's not play games with our family's credit. I mean, the first thing that happens is if we default on our loans, on our bills, is interest rates will rise. That means almost immediately Americans who have mortgages that have adjustable rates will see an increase in their monthly payments. And so we have a whole bunch of Dems who are saying, we want to do the responsible thing and move this country forward. Now, if our colleagues on the Republican side are willing to play games, that's a different matter. So for a lot of folks who go into this very seriously, they're not interested in playing with their vote. And so for them, it's a very difficult thing to watch Republicans play games, play footsies with Wall Street, and then come up here and believe that all of us are going to just act like this isn't real. Sooner or later, this will be real.
Because it's a sham vote, too, people are looking at this differently. To be brutally honest, they're looking at this as it's designed to create a 30-second ad against, I think Leader Hoyer said that very well.